Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you guys are doing well so far today. And we've got a bunch of college football tomorrow, so we got to push out the weekly what to watch if you're a Seahawks fan who wants to prospect scout list. Tomorrow in college football, there are definitely some good games, but it's a little bit funky, honestly. We have a lot of games at odd times. Like we had a lot of games that start at like 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. They space them out a little differently than they usually do. Usually they try to have a bunch of games start at 9 and then they hold off on most of the games until like 12:30. But this week it's a little different. A lot of the big teams are playing on less common channels like SECN or ESPN Plus, which isn't even a channel; it's a subservice. Um, I got a list here of games that are pretty good, pretty compelling, pretty interesting. But honestly, if you have access to channels like SECN or ESPN Plus, the streaming service, or not mainstream basic cable channels, you're probably going to be able to find better games than these, particularly in the early window. But nevertheless, here's what I have put together using the obvious channels, the channels that pretty much everybody can get. So, 9 a.m., we got two games. They're both pretty good. Not spectacular, but I do want to turn my focus to one player in particular in this window before this season ends and we haven't really had a chance to look at them. The first game is Illinois versus Michigan. It's not a great game, but Michigan does have a couple players that I like. Oluwatimi, the center. Haven't mentioned him in a little while here, but we're almost certainly going to need a center next year, and Oluwatimi is going to be one of the better centers in this class. And I like their kicker, Jake Moody. So that's a good game just for those two guys. Really, it's not expected to be a very competitive game, but Michigan's generally worth watching anyway. They might be a playoff team, so it's a good team to watch anyway. And then at 9 a.m., across from that on Fox, we have TCU versus Baylor. TCU is another team that will probably make the playoff. But on top of that, it's time to start talking about a certain player on Baylor. I believe it's Siaka Ika. He's a guy who I haven't really mentioned in this space yet this year, but he's a nose tackle. Now I know defensive lineman from Baylor can be a little bit of a tough sell right now, but he's one of the most intriguing nose tackle prospects in this draft. Combination of size and athleticism is good. So tune in just for that, if nothing else. And while we're at it, I mean, TCU does have Hodges Tomlinson, who I do like. Okay, so that's the early slate. Now we're going to get to the early afternoon slate, and there are two games that, if this was like a month ago, these two games would be massive. But as it stands, they're just good, right? Like 12:30 on CBS, you have Georgia versus Kentucky. Normally, this would be a monster game because you've got Kentucky with Will Levis, and you've got their nose tackle. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his name at the moment. It's Justin Rogers. Yeah, Justin Rogers. And you also have Georgia, maybe the best team in the country. Jalen Carter, Cedric Van Pran, one of my favorite sleeper centers in this draft. But Kentucky just hasn't played well lately. Levis hasn't played well lately. At this point, the only expectation any reasonable person can have is that Kentucky's going to get thwomped by Georgia. Will Levis is going to be on his back maybe 8 or 9 times in this game. He'll be lucky if he makes it out of this game without another injury. So just being honest here, the game has lost some of the kick because Levis isn't playing that well. I still really like him. That's not really the problem. The problem is he's going to get destroyed by Georgia because that looks like the best team in the country, and I don't even know if it's close. So right now, I'm looking at it and I'm going, yeah, this is an exciting game, but is it going to be exciting to see Will Levis get sacked 10 times? Is it going to be exciting to see Georgia be up by 4 touchdowns early in the third quarter? Probably not. So, eh. And then you have the game across from it on ESPN at 12:30, Miami versus Clemson. Now, Clemson by themselves is must-see TV because they have so many players that I like, especially given the fact that they have so many players who are very likely to be first-round picks that Seattle's going to have an interest in. Brian Breeze, Trenton Simpson, Miles Murphy, defensive end Davis. DJU I'm kind of off of right now, but maybe next year, right? Like maybe he'll be a better quarterback next year and we'll reevaluate. So that door is still open. But Miami, their opponent in that game, does have a couple guys that are intriguing, like Van Dyke and Messidor. But Van Dyke in particular, it just hasn't been the season that we were hoping from him. Now, there are some things with Van Dyke that I think are compelling. There are some things about him that I like. And given the fact that we're probably going to commit ourselves to Geno after this season, Van Dyke might be an intriguing 4th or 5th round pick, somebody you develop behind Geno. But he certainly hasn't identified himself as a top quarterback prospect in this college football season. So it's not what it was. It's still a really good game. And if Van Dyke can play well, maybe that'll help it'll help take a step to assert himself as a pro prospect. And then we get to the later games. The late games are not great on this upcoming Saturday in my estimation. I found a couple of interesting ones, but it's not stellar. You'll do a little bit better if you have more channels and access to other feeds, but I wasn't overly impressed by anything that I saw in the late slot. At 4 p.m., we have one game, ESPN, Tennessee versus South Carolina. Tennessee's Tennessee, right? Like, they're very compelling right now just because of Hendon Hooker. Admittedly, a little bit of the shine is off the apple with Hendon Hooker now because he's going to be a first-round pick and because the quarterback situation on this Seahawks team right now is such that he may not be needed. He certainly isn't as interesting to this team as he was even a month ago, but he's still one of my favorite quarterbacks in this draft, and the fact that you might be able to get him without spending a top 10 pick on him continues to make him interesting. And South Carolina, admittedly, I think we're all done with the Spencer Rattler thing. Like, it was fun to think about for a while there. It was intriguing. But the dude just isn't good, and he's not going to be a good pro. So I'm not really thinking about him anymore. They do have a defensive tackle that I like. They do have a nose. Pickens, definitely intriguing to me. So maybe worth watching just for that. But yeah, this game is not what it could have been in the preseason, I think. One of the greatest falls from graces ever, Spencer Rattler. I don't see another really interesting game until 7:30 p.m. on ESPN. We've got Utah versus Oregon. Both these teams have interesting both these teams have players that are interesting to me. Utah mostly Phillips III because he's a nickel corner. He's somebody who's moving up draft boards, I believe, and he's somebody who I think will be on the Seattle radar because we have a lot of corners on this team right now. I don't know if we have any good nickels, or at least guys who are made to play nickel. Phillips III might be that guy. So Utah's interesting for that. Oregon, as we know, they still have Sewell, who I'm off, but he's still not bad. They have another linebacker I like named Flo. They have Bass. They have Bo Nix, honestly, if you want to go that far into it. I'm not a huge Bo Nix fan or anything, but look, we might be in a position where we end up not taking a quarterback until like the 6th round, and Bo Nix could easily be there. So I'm not completely into ignoring the guy, but yeah, there's some stuff going on in that game, I guess I should say. My favorite player in that game at this point is probably their left guard, Bass. I mean, we all saw what that Oregon run game is doing to pretty much everybody this year, and we saw what they did to the Huskies last week. So what they have going on with the interior, their offensive line's pretty good. So Bass would be my player to watch there, and that's it. See you guys later. Hope you have fun watching college football tomorrow.